Our guest for today is the young, charming, enigmatic IraTrivedi. Ira is a multifaceted personality. She's an author, an entrepreneur, and a yoga acharya. Welcome to the show, Ira.
Thank you. Very glad to be here.
So, as we talked about the multifaceted personality, so you have different sides to your personality. Like you're a writer, you're a yoga acharya. So, which is the personality that you relate the most with?
Gosh, I would say all of them in equal measures. There's nothing, I think it just depends on what I'm doing. So I'm doing a yoga session here at the Jagran Lakecity University, and there I will be very much in my yoga avatar because I'll be teaching yoga. So it depends, whatever I'm doing at that point in time, I do try to tap into that particular energy. But I'm excited because what I'm doing here is I'm talking about my new yoga book, The 10-Minute Yoga Solution, which actually brings together writing and yoga. So that's a very nice way of blending both sides together.
So, continuing with the topic of yoga, we've recently celebrated the International Yoga Day on 21st June. And it was a huge event. Like more than 35,000 people have participated, and it has also managed to broken the Guinness World Record. So, how did yoga start? How was yoga introduced to you?
To me personally, actually, the story is not the most positive one. I'll tell you how I did my first yoga class. I was studying in the US and I'd come back to India, and my father had said, "Why don't you guys try yoga?" So my sister and I. And so we had a yoga instructor who used to come home, and he was this really fat kind of yoga teacher who used to come and we used to do all of these asanas, and every day at the end of the yoga class we would do shavasana, and while he was making us do shavasana, invariably he would fall asleep in shavasana. Not only fall asleep, but he would start snoring during the shavasana. And this would happen every day, and finally my sister and I were like, you know what kind of yoga class is this where this teacher falls asleep and starts snoring? Yoga sucks. And that was my first introduction to yoga. But then when I was in the US, I was in college there, there was a lot of media then about yoga. A lot of actors were doing yoga. It would become suddenly very popular. And I said, what is going on here? Why is yoga so popular? I remembered my class that I'd done. Actually, it was here in Bhopal that this yoga teacher had come. We were living here in Bhopal when this whole incident had happened. And I remember I walked into a yoga class, and the yoga class was $20. And I said, my gosh, I can't afford this class. And I left. $20 is like something like, it'll be something like a little less than 1,500 rupees. And so I said, you know what, I can't afford it. It's too expensive. And then I left. And then when I came back to India and I re-looked at yoga, and then my whole yoga journey started. But that's a whole other story. But this was my first introduction to yoga. Was actually pretty negative. But then over time, of course, it's changed.
I've read about you, and I've realized that you come from a family of writers and established writers and politicians. So, was it difficult for you to choose writing between writing and politics?
To be honest, it's interesting I'm sitting here in Bhopal because a lot of the political legacy actually comes back to Bhopal. And this is where my great-grandfather was the first chief minister of the state way back, I don't know when it was in 1956. But it was never, I never actually wanted to be a writer. Writing was not something I grew up thinking I was going to do. I did my MBA at Columbia. I always thought I was going to go into business or have a corporate career. I wasn't very clear, but writing was definitely not something that I was ever thought I would do. But I wrote my first book, and actually I did the first book in Bhopal, so the city does hold quite a lot of memories for me in that way. And I spent a month in this city, and I wrote my first book, and that's how the writing career started. But it wasn't something I'd planned per se. But then over the years, I would do other things, but I would always come back to writing because I felt like it was through writing that I could always make the most impact. And whatever else I did, I always told myself, I'm doing this, I could be writing a book right now. And if I wrote that book, it would help affect so much change. But now with yoga, it's changed a little bit because I do spend more and more time doing yoga activities, teaching yoga. I have an NGO which does yoga. I have books now on yoga. So now I can see that a part of my life is moving more towards towards yoga, but I find that if I can write about yoga, then that brings together both things very beautifully.
So this is a question that comes to my mind as a reader, and it must come to a lot of minds, your readers. What is your fixation with the name Ria?
You know what? I always answer, yes, it's a question that I very commonly get asked, and it's a very question that I always say, you know what, I wish I had a more exciting answer for you all, because the answer that I have is so boring because there's actually no real reason. My first character that I wrote in my very first book, which was semi-autobiographical, which was the book that I wrote in Bhopal, What Would You Do to Save the World? In that book, I named the character Ria because it was an anagram in my own name. But when I began writing my second book, I said, you know what, let me keep this character name. I'll change it later on. But when I reached halfway through the book, I said, you know what, I don't want to change the name anymore. This character is in my mind as Ria. And this happened in every single book. So it was never anything that was planned. It's just the name that I always began the book with, because I left the last book at that name and I stuck with that. So even with my pets, I've got a dog. I keep on repeating the same names of all the pets. They're always, there's one name which is followed, and it keeps happening again and again. So maybe it's just my thing that I've developed.
So talking about your characters, we've observed that the female protagonist. It's always a female who's a protagonist. Why not a male protagonist, or maybe a metaphor as a lead in your book?
Well, Nikhil was the male protagonist in my latest novel, so I did change things up there. In that book, we did have Nikhil. The story was from Nikhil's point of view in that. So I did try something new with that, and I really did enjoy it, actually. I enjoyed writing from the male perspective and adding that to the book. I definitely thought that was an interesting way to do things.
You also have a political background. So did the thought of, just linking it with women empowerment, did it ever come to you that you could be an activist?
I think yes, and I do that with my journalism. So a lot of the journalism work that I do is always around issues of women, whether that's taking up female feticide or child marriage, or a lot of work on sexuality. So I did, when I wrote India in Love, which is all about marriage and sexuality, at the crux of that book is really that it's women who are changing. When we talk about sexuality, it's really the liberation of women that we're talking about, and the entire book is on that. It's a very, very it's quite a feminist book in its own way. So I do bring in activism, particularly to do with women, through a lot of my journalistic work, and I enjoy that part of I really do. I find a lot of pleasure with that part of my life. It's very hard because I find that actually for me to do journalism, it's quite a difficult task to switch from doing fiction, which comes very naturally from yoga, which I've spent so many years learning and doing. To do the journalism is always a little bit more difficult. It involves research, it involves going out there, it involves talking to people, researching stories deeply, but I do find it very gratifying. So I do try to do at least 3 to 4 big stories a year.
So moving on with writing, this is one of the questions that comes to the mind of every budding writer. There are a million thoughts that come to your mind every day. Which is that one thought? How do you pick that one thought which is worth writing a story about?
I wish a million thoughts came every day on book ideas, but they actually don't. They don't. I think writers, after a book, I'll struggle for a long time, for several, maybe a couple of years before the next idea comes. So Nikhil and Ria was my novel, and it came out a few years after India in Love. So it really, the idea comes to you when you're ready. That's what happens. It's like anything else. When you really are ready to sit down and write, the idea will come. Like right now, even though I have a couple of ideas, none of them are really inspiring me enough to write, because I don't think I'm ready to write my next book yet. But I'm sure the idea will come when I am totally ready.
It's very challenging to put forth a story that inspires people. So what are the challenges that you faced on your journey to being a professional writer?
Gosh, the number one challenge is always to inspire myself, let alone inspire other people. Just every single day for me to inspire myself, for me to sit down and write. It's a challenge every single day, not just for writing, actually for yoga as well. For yoga, every single day, no matter what, I struggle to get on the yoga mat. Even this morning, I was in Bhopal and I I have a show coming up, so I have to make sure that I'm doing my practice. And I have a yoga session this afternoon, which I had to prepare for. But it was a huge struggle for me to do the yoga, because it's just, I think the things that are most difficult for us are actually the ones which benefit us the most in the long run. So I do look at yoga and writing both like that. These two things are the two most difficult things I do every single day. Yoga and writing, it's the things that I do that I do, you know? So it's never easy. And I tell this to other writers, that even for me, 8 books later, writing one word, that first line, it's always a huge challenge to do it. It's like yoga. The first step onto the mat and that first Surya Namaskar is always the most difficult, and then it gets easier after that.
There are a lot of struggles in the life of a writer, and one of the biggest challenges, I believe, is the writer's block. So have you faced that?
Basically, my neutral zone is like the one that my constant state of affairs is writer's block, and I would say that's the same with every writer. That constant is writer's block, and anything else above and that is I would consider myself lucky, because we're always blocked. You know, I don't think there's ever any moment in time where you're, not just me, for most other writers, I really am dying to sit down and write. Because writing is a discipline of the mind. You know, and anything which requires the mind to be focused and disciplines, it's natural for our minds to rebel against it. So it's never fun, but it's always hugely gratifying. You know, when you really get in the zone of writing, that's when you have those very, very beautiful moments when the writing comes. But to get into that zone, it'll take you it takes a lot of effort to get there.
Who's your favorite author?
That question I refuse to answer, because it's a question I get asked very frequently, and it's so hard for a writer. It's not fair to ask that, because almost every single book that I'm reading at that moment in time, it's always a very, that book becomes my favorite book for the moment, a favorite author at the moment.
You have a really busy life. Like, you're doing yoga, you're writing, you're an activist, you're a journalist. How do you manage time? How do you manage it all?
You know, I must say that time management is very important. Like, I've had to learn how to manage everything. I've had to learn how to figure out how to do it. So I manage and monitor my time very, very carefully. So from sort of every hour of the day, I try to schedule it, at least a day in advance. So I know what I'm doing. I set goals for myself. Setting goals is very important. So the days that I don't have goals, I actually don't accomplish anything. So I do in the beginning of the day or the beginning of the week, say, okay, this is my goal for the week, and this is what I must accomplish. And earlier, when I began doing this, I would set really difficult goals for myself, and I would never actually accomplish them, and that's very disappointing. So I would advise for people who do or who are trying to do a lot, set goals for yourself that are manageable goals. So at the end of the day, when you actually reach your goal, you feel good about it, that I finished what I set out to do. Versus if you don't finish what you set out to do, then you feel very, very disappointed. So I do think that setting goals and maintaining a schedule and drafting a schedule for yourself is two very important things to do.
So this brings me to my last question. What is your one piece of advice to our budding authors?
Do yoga. Is that good advice? I would actually advise all writers to do yoga, because on a physical level, it's very important, because nowadays we write on computers, there's a lot of neck, shoulder, back problems, and if you're suffering from neck, shoulder, back, wrist problems, you're not going to write at all. Just that physical discomfort is so taxing, it'll prevent you from writing, and almost every single writer that I know has faced this. They face huge problems with neck pain, back pain, especially because we're all on computers these days. But going beyond the physical, writing is an extremely difficult profession, and to be able to discipline your mind, I think the yoga really, really helps on helping focus and concentration and strengthening your mind to be able to sit down and write. And lastly, when you talk about writer's block and blockages, I do think that yoga really does open you up. It doesn't just open up your body; it opens up your mind, and this allows for inspiration and creativity. And all the breath work that we do in yoga really does open up something. It strengthens your nervous system to really be able to write better, because it strengthens our brain.
as we clear out our nervous system, we allow our brain to clear from a lot of other muddled thoughts. So I do think that
Yoga is something that every writer should try to take up, even if it's, as my book says, even if it's for just 10 minutes a day.
This was all we had today. An insight from IraTrivedi's life. We'll be back with more. Stay tuned.